what do you think about SpaceX? Is that you had something you want to share with us tonight about SpaceX and the privatization of space travel?
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. This is very historic and obviously ties into to our name. You know, the fact that this is called Liberty Starship, and we obviously have a little bit of a starship theme. We have a little space background going on right now as we're speaking. This is a BBC News article, and it says NASA SpaceX launch. Astronauts complete rehearsal for a historic mission. And this is hot off the presses type of stuff. You can see a picture of them there, of the astronauts. I actually want to get this much better picture where you can see the new spacesuits, which I think look very futuristic, very sleek, and a lot of people are commenting on that. But this is an interesting point for the history of space travel, and I think ultimately the history of humanity. This mission is going to be critical. We'll see how it goes because this hasn't happened yet. They're just getting ready. The launch is on Wednesday, and so in some ways it's exciting, but in other ways I'm apprehensive. We have had disasters in the history of our space program, and we're not alone in that. The Russians have had disasters as well. And you know, not too long ago, there was a failed launch that didn't make a whole lot of headlines, but I remember watching it live, and there was I think within the last year and a half, I want to say, there was a failed launch to the International Space Station by the Russians. So things can happen, things can go wrong, and in this particular situation, if something goes wrong, it's going to be amplified by a million. But I'm very hopeful that this is going to be a successful mission, and it's very exciting. You know, on the one hand, I have a little bit of a bias because I just think it was kind of nice that we had, you know, that NASA had its own space vehicles, that they had, you know, 4 shuttles and all that kind of stuff. And I love the shuttle. I think the shuttle was really cutting edge and really interesting, but it was immensely expensive to operate. And everything that I've been looking at says that this is going to be much, much cheaper. So that's obviously good for the taxpayer if we can get a little bit more bang for the buck, literally, a little more boost for the buck in this scenario. But I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic. I hope it all goes well, and this will indeed bring in a new era of commercial space flight. Now, right now, this is still under the government tab, so keep that in mind that the government is paying for all this. But technically speaking, they don't own the rocket. They are basically leasing it from SpaceX, which is really interesting. Did you have any thoughts about that, Pete? You're mute.
Yeah,
mute
yes, I
mute.
do. I was on mute.
Yeah, your mute was on.
Yeah, anything that we can do to bring down the price of space travel is awesome in my book. And we all know that the only thing that brings down prices in the long term is price signals. You have to have a market, you have to have competition, you have to have private actors competing. Otherwise, the price will always be what it always was. There's very little incentive to innovate at the government level. It's not even when in the glory days of the space race, we oftentimes think of that as being a purely public endeavor. People will often say, "We got to the moon. How come we can't cure cancer?" Or "How come we can't?" When we went to the moon, we hired companies like General Motors and McDonnell Douglas to build things for us to help us get there. It private actors have been getting us to space for a very long time, for the entire time that we have had space travel. That's the reality. And if NASA had tried to build everything in house, I don't think we ever would have gotten to the moon.
Oh, I don't disagree with you there. That's absolutely true. There's always been this sort of public-private partnership. Of course, on the other side, some people might dislike that. You know, they might have wished that we had involved some sort of our own, I don't know, government mandated manufacturing. Obviously, that's
Yeah.
not where we usually come on. We usually don't come on that side of the argument. But
Yeah,
no,
if, even from a
you're right.
liberty perspective, even from a liberty perspective, oftentimes there can be real problems with public-private partnerships that public or private corporation can milk the government, or they can basically act corruptly, get a bunch of subsidies or whatever, and then skip town and leave the taxpayers holding the bag. Absolutely, public-private partnerships have to be done wisely. It's not as simple as these partnerships are always good or they're always bad. But in the case of the space race, Or for that matter, World War II. We didn't have the military building all the new technology that we developed during World War II. We allowed the private sector, people in the private sector, to innovate, and that allowed us to win World War II. So it is a nuanced issue.
Yeah, the biggest difference here, I think, just to make it clear, is that, in like using the analogy you just said of, for instance, like the military buys its hardware and owns it. So the big difference, the big practical difference here is that NASA doesn't own the rocket. That's really the big difference. And that's what's sort of a game changer, because again, the space shuttle was owned by NASA, it was owned by the federal government. In this case, the Dragon vehicle that SpaceX is providing, it's essentially leased. This is in the article they call this like this is going to be like a space taxi. That's really not a good analogy. It's more like a space leasing company. You know what I mean? They're leasing the rocket to NASA, and they get to use it the way that they want.
Yeah. Well, good for them. I hope we get to Mars in our lifetime.